everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Gray's Coffee Break, where we talk about all kinds of issues related to faith and life. We've recently been going through a series on spiritual disciplines and cultivating relationship with God and kind of what that looks like. So be sure and follow us on Facebook, like us, keep up to date on new episodes. We're posting them every week. And with that, we're going to get into it. So go ahead and grab yourself a cup of coffee, maybe some tea. We'll allow it. And we'll get into our third spiritual discipline. Before we do, I got to ask though, Mark, what mug are you using today?
This is my apology mug, and it says, "I'm sorry for what I said before coffee." Which
I need one of those.
Not often, but every once in a while, if I don't have my coffee, like if I don't have coffee before like 10 or 11, that's trouble.
Yeah. I used to get caffeine headaches, but now I'm caffeine free because I drink decaf, which is nice. It doesn't taste quite as good, but I don't have the caffeine headaches, and like the monster doesn't come out anymore. So that's nice. Certainly for the people I live with.
I normally don't get caffeine headaches. We'll save this conversation for the episode on addiction. People watching saying, "Yeah, you're addicted." Especially Mark. Mark's addicted. If he's drinking that much coffee, he's addicted.
Yeah,
we'll talk about addiction in another episode.
Third cup today, so maybe. But today I'm representing my alma mater, Framingham State.
Oh, you go, Framingham State.
Gotta love it.
Awesome.
All right, well, let's dive in. Today we are talking about solitude and silence. So kind of two different spiritual disciplines, but we're marrying them a bit in this conversation. So gonna switch it over to you, give us an overview on how is solitude and silence a spiritual practice? Is it just being alone? Because that doesn't jive with me so much.
So you remember last week, I think it was, we're talking about fellowship and the challenge to introverts. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this one is going to challenge the extrovert. Right. So, and like I said, all of these disciplines, you have to keep in mind, they're all practices that enable us to create space in our life, have an encounter with the truth, have an encounter with God's presence, his promise, his power in just unexpected, unusual ways. It's intentional space that we create. And some disciplines and practices will stretch us a little more than others. So just keep that in mind. So let's talk about solitude and silence. This is one of the bigger ones in terms of practicing intentional withdrawal, intentional abstinence. So the Puritans, when they thought about spiritual practices and spiritual disciplines, would categorize them as there are some that are public, there are some that are private, and then there are some that are secret. And the way they sort of put it all together was there's some that we do with, as a gathered church, big community, right? There's some that we do private. In other words, it could be us by ourselves, but it also could be with just a few of our friends, our close friends. And then there are ones that we practice in secret, which meant these are the intense, personal, intimate exchanges between us and God. And solitude and silence can work in that arena pretty well. It's not exclusive to that arena, right? You can practice. I've been on retreats where there is solitude and silence, and I've practiced as an individual. It's a monastery up in Cambridge I go to. They take a vow of silence 6 days a week, and I stay there for 3 days, and it's really quiet. Everybody sticks to themselves. And then I've done the same thing with a whole group of people where we all go to a place and we practice these things together. So just sort of some parameters of that. Again, solitude and silence is creating space by abstaining from or withdrawing from noise in all of its forms, in all of its dimensions. So whether we're talking about spatial noise, in other words, just being around people, we're talking about physical noise, hearing people talk or listening to music or all these other things. that's what is at the heart of solitude and silence. It is to create intentional space that forces us to do a few things that are important. Number one, it forces us to self-examine, right? When we're quieted down, we tend to start looking inwardly, examine the terrain of our heart. I had a spiritual formation teacher in seminary, Dr. Hernandez, who really opened my eyes to the reality that the space that is inside here is even larger than anything I can see with my physical eyes out here. And if you sort of ponder that point, that can really sort of like be both challenging and Lord knows what, right? Imagine the space in your soul is bigger than anything that you're looking at outside with your physical eyes. So lots of room to explore, lots of uncharted territory. So solitude and silence give us sort of an intentional space where we can explore some of that undiscovered country, as Shakespeare would say. I think it was Shakespeare. The other thing that it does is things like it quiets us down. It's difficult in the beginning to practice, right? Solitude, silence, but eventually it quiets our soul, it quiets our minds, it puts us in a position where we're now able to hear a little better. You remember, was it John 10, where Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice and I know them and they follow me. And so solitude and silence go a long way on fine-tuning your ears to hear Jesus's voice and then to follow. So in a nutshell, I'm trying to be very simple about it. That's solitude and silence.
Right. When you were saying the kind of to hear and know his voice, I immediately thought of, and I'm not going to remember what book it's from, Old Testament, and get the section of the Bible right.
There you go.
But it was saying, and then the great earthquake came, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then the great fire came, but the Lord was not in the fire. And a great wind came, but the Lord was not in the wind. And then a still small voice.
Yeah.
Which I've always loved that picture that the Lord would speak so gently in the silence and the solitude and that still small voice. But to hear it, like you said, you got to create the space, the silence and the solitude, which is completely against the grain of our lives. We are permeated with noise. You get in your car, radio, podcast, iPod, well, that's kind of dated, iPhone, you're listening to something. Most of the people I know don't have a moment of silence. When they're out in the world, they're talking with people, they're hearing everything around them. I heard a study, it was a couple years ago, the average American receives 500 messages of advertisements per day, which is like a lot. At home, we've got the TV on, we've got music on during dinner while we wash dishes. It's just, the only time it's silent is maybe when you're asleep. And heck, I use a noise machine. Like, there's just no silence.
Wow.
So like,
hardcore right there.
How do we, I think it would be safe to say, and like you said, it's a struggle in that starting point, that there's a cultural, and I didn't say it, personal, addiction to noise, to stuff, to content, to never feel alone, to never have to look at myself. So how do we overcome an addiction to noise, and one that is, whether you seek it out or not, certainly forced upon you?
Yeah, so let's acknowledge it and call it out. And I think you got it exactly right. What solitude and silence right out of the gate highlight is our addiction to noise, right? For lots of varying reasons of, like you said, right? I don't want to think too much. I don't want to feel too much. I don't want to engage myself too much, because there's a suspicion, right, that we're going to have to look at things and see things, how we've acted, how we responded to things we've experienced at the hands of others or at our own decision making, that we don't want to look at. They're painful. They hurt. And so we insulate ourselves through noise, and it becomes an addiction, right? So like with any addiction, the first step is to call it out, right? Don't deny it, but just admit it. We are addicted. Simple ways that you've mentioned a couple of ways already. Simple ways that you can know. You get into your car, and what's after you start your car? What's sort of one of the next things that you do? You hit the radio, you hit play on something,
Right.
and there you go. We for a lot of people, taking a walk by themselves without noise, in terms of I'm going to bring my headphones, my whatever, it's just inconceivable, right? Not and so this strikes to the heart of sort of this kind of addiction that we have, that we all have, right? That we feel safer when it's noisy around us, because then we don't have to listen, and we don't have to pay attention as closely as we could when we're practicing things like solitude and silence. I think that it's interesting that over several times, Gospel Matthew and the others, Jesus retreats and intentionally practices solitude, right? He goes to what the gospel writes, the desolate places. He goes out into the wilderness. He goes out to, so there is definitely something here that we need to take a look at. And like I said, primarily off the top, it's dealing with our addiction to noise. And I get it. I mean, it's taken me years to sort of lean into these two disciplines, because they're tough. I now make it a habit when I get we're talking about a car. I don't turn the radio. I can't remember last time I turned the radio or listened to anything in my car while I'm driving alone. Now, of course, if I'm with my wife and the kids, yeah, good luck. No one's going to go for that. But when I'm driving alone, I normatively don't put on anything. And it's just one of the small ways I just remind myself, this is an important space that I'm creating, so I can think and meditate and practice some stuff there, so I can start to hear better and think more clearly. So, yeah, it's a tough one. This is not an easy thing to practice, especially if you're an extrovert.
Yes, definitely. So what would you recommend then as practices? Because then, there's a temptation of, oh yeah, I'm so addicted to noise. And even I can get like, you get in that, we've talked about it before, when you talk about disciplines, when you talk about ways in, we get like gung-ho. Like, yes, I'm going to go spend 9 hours of my weekend completely alone in my room or in my closet. And I'm going to find this monastery that Mark mentioned. I'm going to go stay for 2 weeks, and so what's the manageable way to not burn out on Solitude and Silence, but to create a habit?
Yeah, I mean, and good question. One of the things, hopefully, that if you've been sort of tracking with us over the last couple of weeks, you'll be hearing, there's a few phrases that you hear over and over again, and that's on purpose. One of the phrases is, when you practice these things, do it in accordance to your own soul, right? So be mindful of where you are and what you're able to do. Don't drown yourself in trying to practice a discipline that you're just not ready for. So let's talk about what that looks like practically in terms of silence and solitude. Let me tell you mentioned the monastery. So I typically, when I go for 3 days, and the brothers that are running, they do communion, and they have service every day. They sing Gregorian chants in a stone chapel. It sounds absolutely amazing. But that's all you get. I mean, you can go to the service and that's it. The rest of the time you don't talk. You're just, the hardest part of me going away. And when I do it, typically it's because I want to spend some isolated time writing, reading, and communing with God. The first 24 hours, it feels like I'm going to go insane, like I'm going to die. I mean, it is really, really hard. I go for walks only because I think I'm going to die. And so again, we all have our human limits here, and it's okay to stretch, but let's be in mind, let's try to do things that are in accordance to our own soul. So with that in mind, I would say you may not want to start with a 3-day trip to, or 9 hours in a closet. That sounds more like depression than solitude and silence, which could be another episode where we'll talk about depression and anxiety for sure. But think of it like this. It is creating space, quality over quantity.
Mm.
So I think it is much healthier to have 10 minutes of solitude and silence and have that be meaningful and focused time where we are leaning in to our inner selves, our souls. We are exploring territory. What's going on inside my heart right now? Right? We're asking God to shed light on what's happening here. Where am I at? And I'd rather 5 or 10 minutes of that and it be meaningful than spending hours and hours in solitude and silence when you're not really ready to do that, right? Because then it becomes sort of like, then you start clock watching. It's like, okay, I'm going to do an hour, 2 hours. No, okay. Oh, man, it feels like it's been like an hour. What is it? 6 minutes? What? So I want to encourage people, look, don't think like if you're not going away for 3 days, 2 days, or not spending hours and hours in solitude and silence, you're not doing it right. It's just not true. Jesus withdrew to the wilderness in accordance to what was going on in his life and ministry. So he withdrew strategically. So when we practice these disciplines, they should be strategic. If you got a lot going on and you're on output like a lot for a long period of time, it may be a good idea to stop and get some solitude and silence in, just as a way of reflecting on, oh, how much have I been putting out emotionally, spiritually, physically? How much of, let me take a deep breath. Let me quiet my soul down because I need to hear Jesus, the one who tells us, come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy, right? So getting to Jesus, who promises us real rest, real soul rest, that's what we want. And solitude and silence become an avenue by which then we can hear the master's voice and be soothed in the deepest parts of our soul, or be provoked, which is the other side of silence and solitude. That it's when we start paying attention that we hear Jesus's voice, right? My sheep hear my voice. Well, when you hear God's voice, sometimes it is the small, still, gentle voice. And sometimes it is the absolute earthquake of your soul, because God wants to address an issue in your life that you've sort of been, turning a blind eye to. And that can happen in solitude and silence as well. And they're both necessary, essential, and meaningful to any follower of Christ, any person of faith.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, I'm just thinking about, kind of the practicality as we're all at home and perhaps feeling like we're in solitude. And so maybe just real quickly trying to tease out the difference of, yes, we're at home. Yes, there is solitude in the sense from the world that we were interacting with, but that not being the same. And so, for parents, especially with young kids, I'm thinking of my sister and brother-in-law, and they've taken up solitary running, which neither of them like to run at all. But it's a way for them to be alone. And so because, they're with their kids and it's, they're both home all the time. So there's just never that moment of having their own time of peace and quiet. So just as we kind of wrap up, if you have any practical advice or encouragement for people who maybe are alone, or even, single people who like, I'm alone all the time. And what's the difference of, focusing in on that benefit of those 10 minutes of, this is different.
Yeah. So, I mean, for folks that are single or alone, or, have an abundance of time to practice solitude and silence, I would simply say, you make the distinction. There is a difference between I'm at home alone and I am practicing solitude and silence. Solitude and silence as practices, as disciplines, have a purpose and a focus. And the focus is, I want to hear from God. You could be alone or by yourself in your house, walking around or doing dishes or laundry. That doesn't mean you're practicing solitude and silence. So don't miss out on the intentionality of solitude and silence. You have to have the intentionality to create a certain space so that you're looking and listening to what God is saying or revealing. So that's for the people that have an abundance of time and practice. Now, let's get to the people that are hearing all this and going like, yeah, come to my house and watch my 6 kids. And then I'll have some moment of silence if you're willing to come to my house and take care of my babies. That is much more difficult, and therefore requires strategic planning and partnership. And those are the 2 things that I would say: planning and partnership. So you want to plan these times of silence and solitude. They're not just going to come and assault you, or you're going to wake up one morning and be like, okay, right now, this is great. Let's just have some silence and solitude. That's not usually how that works. It has to be planned, which means then that you're probably, if you're a single mom, single dad, married with kids, it probably means that you need to look at your calendar, right, and sort of figure out what rhythms are going on and where can you practice some of this stuff, which then leads me to this, is partner. When your life is so busy that you can't have solitude and silence, you're going to need help, and it's okay to ask for help. Don't try to do this on your own if you can't, right? Get a friend, get someone to help you out, whether it's watching the kids for 30 minutes, 15, even for 15 minutes. Do not underestimate the power of a quality moment of silence and solitude. I can't tell you how taking a shower, right? I always kid around it when I'm preaching at Grace. I say the shower is my holy place. I can't tell you how many times I've had a meaningful moment in the silence and solitude of my shower with God, which I don't want to actually put that picture in your head. So erase in Jesus' name. But you get what I'm saying? It's you have to plan. And for those that have a lot of responsibility to others, you have to partner. The illustration that you're saying, the solitary running, was that your
sister?
Your sister? That's an awesome example of how 2 people can help each other and support each other. So those are some real practical ways of just exploring this discipline, and it is absolutely meaningful. You have to give it time. It's weird because we are addicted to noise. So right. Don't think the first time out, you're going to 15 minutes of solitude and all of a sudden, man, the clouds opened up. I heard this audible voice and, light came shining down. Yeah, no, probably not. But as you give it time and consistency, you'll see that your ear and the eyes and ears, not just of your head, but of your heart, will start to become attuned.
Right. And that leans back on the idea of it's a practice. You practice. It goes on and on. And again, just reiterating that, it's a practice for the means of cultivation, not just to sit in silence for the sake of it, but to draw close and to be with the Lord and be as in his presence and experience that grace. So thanks again for walking us through yet another discipline. Awesome to get to talk with you. Thanks everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Maybe were encouraged, maybe challenged a little bit. Hopefully you can find time to start doing some of these practices for yourself. And again, just to try and cultivate that relationship of being with God and getting to draw near to him. And be sure and like and follow us on Facebook. More episodes coming up. We're moving through these disciplines. And good to see you, and stay tuned for next time.
Yeah, stay healthy. God bless you guys.